So my very off the back question for you, which may be totally off the mark because I'm not a psychologist, but you have ADHD.
Yeah, I probably do have ADHD, but I don't see that as a bad thing. If anything, it's kind of like a superpower. I think that if you have ADHD, you have more of a hunter's type of brain, right? Where you you're finding that shortcut. Like you
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper. Welcome to My Rejection Story. Can you tell me about a time in your life where you felt rejected?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say maybe early on when I was trying to land certain writing jobs or trying to get published on certain like prestigious writing websites where I would initially send them pitches and either they'd pay me no mind or they would, give me a polite little rejection. I dealt with a lot more rejection when it came to getting myself in front of clients, getting certain writing jobs, guest posts, and things like that when I was less experienced. And then as time goes on, some of those same publications that I reached out to after I got a little bit of clout or my writing got better, I grew an audience. Like funny enough, some of those people came back to me and wanted me to write and ask me. So, I've dealt with lots of different rejections from writing gigs to even on a day to day basis. I have products, I talk to people, I try to sell them things, and the vast majority of time, actually, the answer is no. But
Yeah,
getting through those no's and to get to the yeses, that's pretty much what the game is all about.
I totally relate to the writing rejections. I think it's probably like part of the journey of being a writer. But in your TED talk, you said something that I loved, which was that for every 10 year, I think I'm probably paraphrasing, I'm definitely paraphrasing, so I may not get this quite right, but you said something along the lines of for every 10 no's, you get one yes. That is like, makes all those no's worth it. I'm not sure if that was the exact number, but this idea that kind of those actions that we're putting out when we're writing or whatever it is, you're pitching products now, that just that one yes makes up for every single no is something that immediately drew me to your work and your messaging because it's like, yeah, like we need more of this sort of way of thinking about things.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And like, I think maybe like it could be a product of the way we're brought up or the school system or just like this idea that if like we kind of grew up trying to avoid mistakes and you were really like graded on how few mistakes you made, right? But if you look at let's say like I like to use like an analogy of baseball, right? In baseball, if you hit 300, which means if you hit 3 out of every 10 times you go at bat, you're like a top 1% baseball player. You're like a Hall of Famer if you can hit 3 out of every 10. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, like the numbers are similar. Like if every 10 people you talk to, you're closing a couple of them, like those are really good numbers. So like a really successful business will still have the vast majority of people saying no. But the magnitude of those wins just washes it out. And I think a lot of people are worried about how it feels to be rejected because let's just be honest, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Whether it's a business rejection, whether it's you asking someone out, whether you're trying to make a connection, it just seems like if they're saying no, like you have this tendency to take it very personally and make it seem like it's something about you or your character. When in reality, if you look at it, you're just going to be like not everyone's cup of tea. So I talk to students about this all the time. I'll say, when you get on the phone to talk to somebody and try to close a deal, there's basically going to be 10% of people, they're just going to say yes no matter what, right? 10% of people, they're just going to say no no matter what. Then there's going to be those other people in that middle range where that's where some of the persuasion comes in, getting them to say yes and things like that. But even the ones who do well in close versus the ones who don't, what I like to think about is it's not like they rejected you per se, but it's like the strategy you went about doing it at the time just wasn't sufficient to get the yes. And the strategy is something that you can change, right? So I'll have students, oh, I got on a bunch of calls and they didn't close. Well, it's like, yeah, you're not that good at sales yet, and you need to get better at sales, and then more will close. But it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Where if that same person would have ran into you a couple months later when your skills are better, they would have said yes, right? So it's something that it's a variable that you can change. But I think probably the number one inhibitor of success for any individual is the fear of rejection and embarrassment, and like the way we relate socially to other people. And it's not really that it's not so much that we're afraid of getting rejected, it's that we are afraid of some, like, whatever failure component involves other people knowing that you failed, other people, that like that level of embarrassment that comes from falling flat in front of your face in front of other people. It could be a real deep visceral fear that people have, but it's the way to pretty much all the big dreams that you want. Like, you have to go through that one door, which just a lot of people are understandably unwilling to, but it's something that if you want your life to be good, you have to figure out how to get around.
I love that so much. And you touch on a lot of the topics that I'm like, I can't shut up about. I think very much there's this it's survival that we're scared of failing in front of other people, because if we do and it doesn't go well and that they, kick us out, like, that lizard brain of ours interprets that as, well, you're going to die, like you're going to starve to death. And I think that we are not always aware of how much that sort of old, not very evolved part of our brain is controlling our actions and holding us back from kind of taking those next moves. So, I love that you kind of touched on that. And I always find that failing in front of people I know is scary, like the scariest thing. Like, pitching strangers isn't too scary to me, I guess, because maybe my like subconscious brain doesn't associate them with my survival. So I'm like, well, they're not they're not in the tribe yet. They're not keeping me alive, so I can make a fool of myself in front of them. But going to past clients and asking them for referrals, sending them my like sales deck or whatever, like reaching out to people in my network is always the scariest thing. And I think it might be like this, what if this changes their perception of me? What if this is the thing that kind of makes them kick me out? So I'm really excited to jump into your story. But before we do that, I want to talk to you a little bit about your writing journey. I believe you've self-published 3 books. I know you've written 3 books. You're also, am I right? So you're working on your 4th book? I think I heard you talk about that somewhere. So yeah, I'm curious to know like a little bit about that journey. I took a like squiz on Amazon and saw hundreds and hundreds of reviews. So looks like you got some pretty healthy sales going on in this space. And I loved reading your book, like the honest guide to self-improvement. It was honest and very refreshing to read. So I'm curious to know a little bit about the self-publishing journey and how you have, I guess, sold in the A to Z of like from conception, ideation to writing to publishing, and then post-publishing, the sales and marketing side, which is often a tricky side of writing a book.
Yeah, so when it came to the books, writing books is something that I always wanted to do for like a really long time, and I stumbled into writing. Like, long story short, I was working on some self-improvement stuff to fix my own life because my life wasn't doing so good at the time. After I started doing that, I started like sharing little things I was learning online. A friend of mine asked me to write an article for his website. I said yes, wrote one article, fell in love with it. Literally been writing every day since, like never stopped, right? So at first I was writing for his website, a couple different blogs, and then I got this idea that probably about a year in that I wanted to write this book. So I actually took a how to self-publish books. It was called Self-Publishing School, and they walked me through the process, like pretty much A to Z. So that was very helpful. But basically, the process looks like this. So first thing you have to do is come up with a book idea, right? And there's an exercise I like to use to come up with ideas, and it's writing down 10 ideas every day. I used to do that for writing headlines for different blog posts I was working on. So I learned that from this writer named James Altucher, one of my favorite writers, right? So for the book, what I did is expanded it out to 50, right? So I had 50 different titles that I wanted to browse through and figure out would be a good idea. And I kind of had the sense it was going to be like a general self-improvement book, and I was just going to like fill out my ideas with it. And so I kind of had this idea in my head that I wanted to write about, how to figure out what you're destined to do, like the things you're supposed to do. And so that's why eventually landed on the idea of the destiny formula. And then in terms of like how the research went, what I do is I go look for different books in different categories on Amazon that are related to my book. And then I'll go look at the 3-star reviews of books, because 3-star reviews tend to be the most honest. Like 5-star reviews, sometimes they just really like the author and they're just going to, whatever he
Yeah.
said. Usually people who write 1-star reviews are kind of negative people who just are just trying to be haters. But if there's like a 3-star review, it'll say, okay, this is what I liked about the book, and then this is what I didn't like about the book. Right? So I'd look at a lot of different books in the category and say, okay, what are some of the things that people wanted to see across most books that I'll keep it?
Yeah.
And then what are some of the things that they said they didn't like? And then that's where I come and like try to fill in the gaps with my idea, right? So that's kind of the idea formulation process. Then after that, I think probably the most critical thing that you need to do for a book is 2 things. One is a mind map. The second thing is an outline, right? So a mind map is basically where either you take a notebook, you take post-it notes, but you try to like, you kind of like scribble out and like storyboard, like, all right, what is everything that's going to go in this book? Like, what could the chapters be? What are the subtopics underneath each chapter? And then I would go again and do mind maps for each chapter. Like, what are the sub-ideas in this chapter and what are some of the sub-ideas underneath? So you kind of just, you want to get it all out of your head and onto a piece of paper. And that's like the messy version of your idea. Then you come back later and then you turn it into a formalized outline, right? Like I put it on a Google Doc. So these are chapter names, subtopic names, bullet points. So it's really, a lot of the problems get solved before you sit down to write. It's like I feel like if you sit down and you just try to write a book from scratch, like you're going to be in for a nightmare. You have to spend the most time figuring out what ideas are going to go in the book before you do it, right? And then after the outline, I'll just write the book however long it takes from start to the first time. It took like 30 days. It's like write the draft from start to finish. Like all you do is wake up, write, and you just do it consecutively until it's done. And you don't want to judge the first draft at all. The only goal is to get the draft done. And then after that, you go through different rounds of editing. So usually I'll go through like 5-6 rounds of editing. And the intricacies of editing can get like a little bit complicated, but first pass, like you go through and you just look through and see like, does the general shape of the idea look good? That's where you'll probably notice like there's probably sections, chapters that need to either be like removed or like moved around. Then as the edits continue, it gets more like fine tooth comb sort of thing where you're going from overall structure to line by line. Does the sentence need to be there? To fine tooth comb. Then I pass it off to a professional editor to go through and do another round of edits.
Okay, so all this time you're the one editing through until you reach the like kind of you've done multiple rounds and then you pass it off to a professional. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll do multiple rounds and then pass it off to a professional. So
Okay.
especially like with my last one, I really wanted to hammer it home. So like I was like, let me get a couple cracks at it myself, then let me do it to a professional, right? So for the first 2 books, I just had copy editors, which are people who are like primarily focused on the grammatical structure, type,
Yeah.
stuff like that. But the 3rd book, I actually hired a developmental editor, and the developmental editor looks at the entire structure of the whole book. Like, does like the narrative arc of the book make sense? Are the ideas good? She would double check, and it's like, okay, what do you have to support this claim? She was really hard. She was really hard on me, which I appreciated. She was like trying to make sure that the ideas are really strong, and so always want to get an editor at a minimum, proofreader for sure.
Yeah. Having gone through the process of you developmentally editing your book yourself, and then the 3rd time hiring someone to be a developmental editor, would you recommend that authors make that investment? Do you think that that's a worthwhile investment, investing in the developmental editor? Or is there like a certain point in your career where it would make sense?
I would say it makes sense to get a developmental editor if you're at the point where you feel like you have a book that really has a chance to take off, and you kind of want it to be your flagship book that people come back and over and read and like opens doors for opportunities for you and stuff like that. So I would definitely say so. Probably if I were doing it over, I would spend a good chunk of time building up an audience and building up like critical mass before publishing my first book. I think I maybe jumped the gun a little bit too fast jumping with the first one, but I'm still happy that I did it in the way that
Yeah.
but yeah, I would say if you're trying to, if you want your book to do serious numbers, I would have a developmental editor to make sure that the ideas in there are really good so that people want to read and share with other people for sure.
I mean, I'm thinking like, you say you maybe jumped the gun a little bit, but I think what you did is so much better than like the alternative, which is waiting for everything to be perfect. Like, you have the funds for the editors and you have everything going before you kind of make that move. Whereas I think studies, research, I know that studies in Atomic Habits by James Clear that show like doing, like putting in the reps of actually creating something is the only way we can get better at it. So the fact that by the time you wrote your third book and you had a developmental editor, you'd also written two books before, also would have played a big role. And I mean, your first two books did really well from what I could see. So it's not like
Yeah.
no one read them.
No, they did do pretty good. I think probably as time goes on, like you get like as you get people think it's the opposite. Like they think it's when you write multiple books that it's going to be easier for you, which I would say on the one hand, like the mechanics of the writing is easy, but your standards go up and you're more judgmental of your work. So sometimes I read my first book and I'm like, compared to what I would write right now, you know.
Yeah.
I know, but honestly though, writing that first book was huge for me. Just one was something I always wanted to do. Two, it got the monkey off my back. Like I wrote a book. Now I know I can keep doing it. Three, people people respect you more as a writer if you have a book versus if you don't. Like
Yeah.
it's just a night and day difference where people as soon as you tell people like, oh, I wrote a book, they're like, oh my god, what is the book about? Blah 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 blah. So yeah, it's been an amazing experience. All three books, I would say for sure.
I think even the like practice of writing a book, even if no one reads the book, takes an immense amount of self-discipline to just put those words on the page. So like even just from having that and the fact that the book actually has people reading, but you brought up a really great point, which is that as you progress and you get better at your craft, you will be more judgmental because your standards are higher, but that just means that your future work's going to be better. I think someone on this podcast was saying if you go back and read James Patterson's first books, they were really not that good. Like, obviously, he's known for his blockbuster, like the Da Vinci Code, but he was publishing long before he was, as good as the work many people know now. So, yeah, I love that. So, your next parts of the process, and I love also kind of how you captured the book writing process because I've never heard kind of nonfiction self-help writer explain it in such a tactical way, especially they're going to the 3-star reviews and doing like intense market research to kind of figure out what are the gaps and what do people want to hear more of. In the green room, I was just telling you that one of the things I really liked about your book is just how different it was to other self-help books I've read, and that rarely happens to me anymore because I've just read so many self-help books. And so it's very clear that market research worked. And I think that a lot of writers kind of have this idea and think that it's revolutionary because maybe their clients are telling them, wow, no one's ever said that to me. But just because no one's ever said it to their clients doesn't mean that no one's written about it. It just means that that information hasn't entered the client's orbit yet. And so I love that you did thorough research to figure out like what isn't actually being spoken about in your books. So yeah, to carry on with the conversation of kind of that process. So now we're kind of figured out the writing phase. What did it look like post-publishing? What was your process with actually kind of getting eyes onto this book and getting the sales up? And just one thing quickly before we continue, do you mind shifting slightly to this way? Yeah. Just so that if I do video clips, I get your face. Thanks.
Yeah, so I would say for the promotion part of the book, it got it got more, like I would say, like aggressive and intense with each book. So the first book, I really didn't have much of an audience to sell to. Like I didn't have an email list or anything like that. Second and third book, I had an email list. Like probably plenty of people have probably told you this before, but if you want to sell books, having an email list is crucial. Having an email list is one of the best ways to sell anything. It's like keep
Yeah.
telling people, like if you're a writer, business owner, whatever, build an email list, like collect emails from people. So at that point, like through my blogging on like Medium, different places, I'd built up an email list. And the second book, basically what I did, sent a fair amount of emails about it. I probably sent like 10 emails about it, just hyping up the book before it came out, and then when it came out, running like I think I ran like a specific price promotion. So like back at that time, I was doing like the algorithm kind of hack thing where you price your book really cheap. You price it like 99 cents or something like that. You try to get a bunch of people to buy it, then you switch it to the full price, and then Amazon doesn't know the price. It just knows that your book's selling a lot, so it'll start pushing it for you, and then you know you'll start making new sales at that new price, right? So that was pretty much what I did with the second book. Third book, I put a fair bit more thought into it. A couple of things I did. So I had like a launch window week for the book, and I created I created bonuses that you could get for buying the book, including like free mini courses based off of the topics in the book, stuff like that. I think I had like PDF copies of my old books that you would get, but it was only during this specific window. And
Mm.
then there was like a deadline, so like there was a real push to get a lot of sales that first week. I also had a lot of different people in my network who were like they were affiliates for the book, where they would send out emails to their list about the book. They would get some commissions and stuff like that. Not huge commissions, but a lot of them were good friends of mine. I had a network at that time, so I had like a few dozen other people sending emails about that book to their audience too. So there's a lot of critical mass involved in that. And then the bonuses I think were really key. Like I took the course, I took the book and turned it into a course and just took the ideas from it and made them like actionable and gave it away in exchange for that. And that was really helpful. One thing that I didn't do that I see a lot of authors do that I will do in the future is spending a lot of time doing like a podcast tours, right? So usually if you see someone comes out with a book, like the big names, like they're on every podcast and they're just going through. There's this guy, Hal Elrod. He wrote this book called The Miracle Morning. And actually, when he published it, the sales were pretty lackluster, but he basically went on podcast for 2 years straight, and all he did was talk about his book. So I think that's another, the podcast tour method works really well. But for me, that last book, create bonuses for the book that they can only get during launch week, have other people promote the book. Also, there's things like the launch team. Like you want to have a launch team, which there's a group usually like 50, like however much you can swing, 50 to 100 people who are going to read the book before it comes out. Then they buy the book on day one, leave a review for it, help get some velocity for it. They share it with their friends and family. Also, I emailed everyone in my personal network, just people I knew, people people from my Toastmasters club, old friends, family members, friends of friends. Like, hey, I have this book out. I worked really hard on it. You should buy it because you like me, right? So I just reached out. Like that was that point where like I tried to pull like every favor that I could possibly pull at that time, and just really try to get as many people as possible
Yeah.
booked during that first week, and then let the sales carry from there.
This is such a great, thanks for like kind of taking us through the whole marketing process because yeah, I don't think that there's a lot of transparency on this. And you highlighted, I think, fantastic tips, which is rely on partnerships. So getting people to kind of send the book through, like through affiliate programs, that sort of thing. The bonuses, really smart, something that I did also during the podcast launch. And launch group, also very smart, getting that kind of hype squad going. On the and also leaning into community. And I'm going to speak on that in a second and ask you about that. But on the podcast thing, that's actually exactly what my business model is. So my clients, we book them on podcast tours for their books. And I mean, one of our clients, he owned like 2,000 followers on LinkedIn or something, and his book was number one on Amazon the day it launched in its category. And he had been going on podcasts a long time prior, but he'd also been telling the host, please release this episode in book launch week. So the week the book launched, there's like this sort of influx of episodes going out that tells the algorithm like, oh, this is a big deal. Did you know that my company, Hustling Writers, books entrepreneurs and authors on podcasts? We've been doing this for the last 5 years, and we've booked our clients on hundreds of top 1% and top 0.5% podcasts, which has, as a result, led to their books being instant bestsellers and even selling out on Amazon on the day of release. If this is of interest to you and the idea of being interviewed by a name like Adam Grant or Mariana Hewitt sounds really exciting, let me know. Email media@hustlingwriters.com and I'll be in touch to book a discovery call. So it's also like timing, but something that's very hard, and I think that a lot of authors struggle with, is the fact that writing the book is such a big time commitment, and then doing the like promotion and kind of building that momentum going is hard. It's hard to put that, like prioritize that. So I'm curious to know a little bit about that, but I'm also curious to know about, that pulling in the favors and emailing everyone in your community is really, really effective. I'm like obsessed with this podcast, so I think I've been trying to do that, but it's also really scary because this is like people we know, right? And what if they hate the book? What if they think I'm weird? These are all the thoughts that go through my head. So not for, I haven't written a book, but for other things that I'll be working on. So I'm curious if you had any of those thoughts, and also how you manage the time of prioritizing, not just writing a book, but building up all this momentum towards the book launch.
I think by that point, so like by the time I read my third book, I had been writing for a couple years, and I was very confident. And then I read through, I was like, nah, this is good, right? So usually the first two books, I wasn't sure if they were good or not. And for a while, I wasn't sure if my writing was good or not. But I really saw some like, this one's pretty good, and they're gonna like it. So I really have a problem with that. And then like, I mean, yeah, it had just been a product of, and really at this time, everything was firing on all cylinders. Like I was the highest earning writer on Medium. I had dozens of friends and other writers. I was super tapped in, like kind of felt like peak of my powers at that time. So I was just like, let's just get this thing out there. In terms of like time management, like I've never been the best person at time management, other than like I always am doing something. So like there's that. But I would say it would be important to separate your time out into sort of those like maker versus manager hours, where like I like to stack my first part of the day where I'm doing like maker stuff, where I'm making things, where I'm writing. So if I ever have a book, the very first thing I do, very first thing in the day, is write the draft of the book. Like that box just has to get checked. And then once you have your couple hours where you're doing your highly creative stuff, then in the afternoon, that's when you can manage your certain tasks and things like that. I'd also hired a virtual assistant specifically for that project to manage all the emails and the replies and track the replies and set up the affiliate links and all that stuff. So like I didn't have to do all that stuff personally. So having that assistant coming in to help around that time was really powerful, because I had some money that I could delegate to that. But I would say really it's the way I stack my day, where I feel like people, they stack their days incorrectly. You should stack the most like important, whatever things are going to be most taxing mentally during the day, like do those first, and then the things that are more like managerial admin stuff do after, would be my number one piece of advice.
Yeah, it's so great, such a great piece of advice. I've heard it before, and I think I'm also not great with time management. I'm great with pushing things all out when it gets close to the deadline, but like kind of general day-to-day stuff when there aren't big impending deadlines. So I always think, oh, I should do the thing that like takes the most mental energy, or that like I'm kind of have the most resistance towards. And I just always find myself like wanting to gravitate to the things that feel natural and easy, and it's like a constant battle. Um, but I have one more question on the sort of self publishing route. And my final question for you is, did you immediately know that this is the route you wanted to go for? And why did you opt for self publishing versus some of the other models, which would be hybrid or traditional? Yeah, just, or do you have any thoughts on those models? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for a while I kind of had this like anti-authoritarian bent where I was like, I don't want to have to like kowtow to these people and like beg them to shop my book, and them having all the creative control over it, and them taking most of the royalties as well. I had heard a lot of things about people who would traditionally publish books, and like they didn't sell very well because you're really even if you're with a publisher, like a lot of the book marketing is going to be on you, which is like why a lot of publishers aren't even going to take you unless you have an email list with tens of thousands of people on it and stuff like that. I've probably since changed my mind where maybe after this book, I would be willing to shop for a book deal. But at that time, I just wanted to get it out there, and I felt like the process was just too much red tape, too many people involved, and probably like honestly until for the first two books, like I didn't even think a publisher would want to take me based on where I was at, anyways. Maybe by the time I got to my third book, for sure, but those first two, I was kind of up and coming, so it just didn't really cross my mind.
Mm.
I was just sold on the idea of self-publishing, and just because I just really wanted the book out there, so I knew that the best way I could do that if there was just zero middleman involved in the process.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for that. I think that from various conversations I've had, you were spot on a couple of things. Like one, nonfiction, the biggest problem that people I've spoken to on this podcast had was the fact that they needed to be like basically famous. One person was advised by her agent to buy Instagram followers so that publishers would look at her. And not, it wasn't her agent, sorry, it was an agent that was like prospecting her. And someone else, Jason Finrula, he talks about building out an Instagram following literally to get the book deal. Like that's how he amassed his 140,000 followers. So that is very much a very real thing. But also interestingly, you might be interested to know, I spoke to a literary agent who represents nonfiction authors for this podcast, and she said that for nonfiction authors in the self-help space, that's like a very difficult space to get into, kind of career development space as well. Versus it's much easier if you kind of are writing about something topical, current affairs. Like, did you write a biography on Kamala Harris, and now she's like the nominee for the Democrats? Like, you can get a book deal for that. But if you are kind of really sharing your expertise, she was saying she actually advises people to self-publish, and that the self-publishing route can be more beneficial because you're keeping the royalties. And like she's listed some other reasons. So I just thought that was an interesting perspective. So yeah, that aside, why are you considering working with a traditional publisher for your next book?
So there's this guy I respect. His name is Nat Eliason, and he kind of like wrote these contrarian arguments about traditionally published versus self-published, and like quality the quality of like the editing team and the creative team and stuff like that. He kind of said that they were a lot more involved than you might think, and they actually had a lot of insights that might be valuable for you than you might think. And then he said also was making the argument. He's like, yeah, I mean, if you get a book deal and you get that advance up front, like then you could just kind of just focus more on the writing without having to do all the marketing, song and dance that you might have to, like with the self-published book too. And he said that they like give you a lot more support than you want. Also, selfishly, I'd like to see my book in a bookstore. And I know it's a lot hard. Like I know it's very difficult to get a self-published book into like a regular chain bookstore. And even though I know like bookstore sales, most of the sales still come from Amazon, but like kind of having the book in the store is cool, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's and like for like bestseller lists and stuff like that. Like if I'd like to make a run at like really like get on the New York Times list and stuff like that. And I know you got to be either traditionally published or maybe if you're like the only examples I've seen where people end up getting on the Times list is like maybe people like it's like David Goggins, he self-published his book, but then it took off so much that it got picked up by a publisher, then got put in the bookstores and stuff like that. So those would be some of the reasons. And I have a couple of colleagues who, yeah, they've gotten some pretty sizable advances and stuff, and they're saying it's actually been a delight to work with a publisher. So
Yeah, yeah. If it's a big advance, I can definitely see yeah, like it kind of gives you that security to focus on the writing process. And I think that for people opting for the self-publishing route and the hybrid publishing route, your book's not necessarily, it's not making, it may not ever make you money, but it's definitely not making you money in the creation phase. And so you have to keep the business running and all the other things kind of running that you probably can't give the book as much attention as you could, I guess, if you got like a big fluffy book deal. So this was fantastic. I want to steer the conversation a little bit more towards you. I know a bit about your life thanks to your writing. And I really enjoy reading your writing. You have this very real, say it as it is tone. And I'm not a fan of jargon or fluffy writing. I often find that it's kind of obscuring the fact that maybe there isn't a lot that the person has to say. So yeah, I like your writing was like very straightforward, but then also it kept me like going like, whoa, that's super profound. Um, so I'm not sure if that makes sense, but yeah, in your book and on your website, you wrote that you were the kid with potential, and you also wrote, I avoided everything that required effort because if I failed, my smart kid image would shatter. And I relate to this in my own way. I wrote a newsletter about always being told that I have unfulfilled potential throughout my schooling career. Like, don't know what you're supposed to do with that, but anyway. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about who Ayodeji was before he started writing his writing career. Who were you, kind of as an adolescent and young adult?
yeah, that's a good question. I would say like definitely definitely would say like at least a lot of other people told me like very bright, learned things like very very quickly. I kind of got it early on that I like my brain process information like faster than some of my students. Always sort of smartest kid in the class sort of thing. But I could be like, but I like to talk a lot too, and I was a kind of troublemaker, and I was kind of bored, like maybe not stimulated enough, whatever. And then it would be like there'd just be a lot of situations where I enjoyed like the intellectual aspect of learning, but not like the tediousness of like things I didn't feel were necessary. Like I remember in college, I had this one professor. It was like a marketing professor. I show up in class and I'd be like heavily engaged in conversation, like talking through everything, but like I wouldn't do any of my homework. I wouldn't do any of the homework. I wouldn't take the quiz. And he was like, I don't. He's like, I don't understand you. He was like, you're clearly very intelligent and you're into the ideas, but you don't like do any homework. I'm like, and in my head, I was like, well, clearly through like the way I was talking about it during class, like it seems like I know what I'm talking about. It's like, why do I have to do the homework, right? So it was very, very little respect for authority figures. Very little respect for like the traditional process of doing things. Where I just didn't I didn't do my homework. I didn't do my homework ever. I never studied until maybe the last minute when I needed to. Kind of always skated by. But then as time went on, it got to the point where it went from me not doing as much as I should in school to me not doing anything. Like so, when I was in college, I didn't go to class. I drank every day. I drank every day. I was drinking every day, smoking weed, girls, like whatever I wanted to do aside from studying. So it wasn't like I had this extremely bad. I got a good upbringing, but like I kind of found every way to mess up what I had going on, right? So in the back of my mind, like I always felt like there was some potential for me to do something, but pretty much all throughout adolescence and high school and college, like I just did not take things very seriously. And I guess as weird as it sounds, like I always had in the back of my head, I was like, I don't know how, but I'm gonna be successful. I'm gonna start a business. I'm gonna be rich. Like it's gonna happen at some point. But I just took a lot of detours, I guess, along the way because I just, for whatever reason, I just didn't feel like doing a lot of the other things that most people seem so concerned about. Like, oh, I got to get this perfect job, and I got to, oh, if I don't get my grades, blah blah blah. I really just didn't care. I don't know. And then whatever, like I would always be into these little. I'd always have these little harebrained schemes that I would like get excited about. So I did like I did like the MLM company is a random sales job. So like I was always looking for, I think I was always kind of looking for like that little shortcut. Like, I didn't want to have a job. I'm kind of lazy. I think that's kind of my biggest strength. Is I was just lazy. Where I was trying to find like the most optimal way to do things. Where like I didn't have to go to a job, working 8 hours a day or slaving away doing homework. Um, that manifested itself in other ways, like selling weed and doing some other stuff maybe I shouldn't have been doing, right? But like I always had it in me where like that whole conventional path of living, like I guess it just personally I could tell very early on that it didn't make sense for me and that's like not how things were gonna turn out. But then again I'm also just lazy. Like I could have did my homework and
Yeah.
stuff like that, but that's just how it ended.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm gonna ask a very off-back question, and I'm only asking this because your story is like I'm a different person and I have a different life. I think I started caring about my like performance when I was like 13 years old. But a lot of what you said very much resonates with me. I was always just not doing homework, not listening, daydreaming, looking for shortcuts. So even when I did start caring about my performance, I was not going to study everything in the curriculum. I was going to like figure out what 3 questions are going to be asked in that exam, and I will study 1/10 of the curriculum so that I can get ace the 3 things that are. And I often noticed that I didn't follow the way of learning or thinking that the system wanted me to follow. And it was a weakness when I was younger, and now I look at like that laziness as like a strength. Like I figured out a better way of doing things and working. And I also only realized in adulthood that I had undiagnosed ADHD my whole life, and that's kind of probably that like very different way of thinking. So my very off the back question for you, which may be totally off the mark because I'm not a psychologist, but is do you have ADHD?
Maybe like I'm pretty sure like I'm pretty sure if I looked if I just started hunting around the DSM-5 or whatever, I would find like a half dozen things that I have probably. Um, but I
I mean,
think
that's also the danger of these labels, right? I
yeah,
think like
probably I don't know. Like I think probably. I think for me though, I kind of always I just focus less on that and focus on. I kind of see all of my quote unquote flaws or perceive things as a strength, right? So where it's like I do have a difficult time with like being organized and disciplined and very methodical about things, but then I think that also like contributes to my creativity and me always being distracted and kind of having these pie in the sky things and dreams that like led to me making them real, right, and figuring out how to do that. So it's like maybe I probably do have ADHD, but I don't see that as a bad thing. If anything, it's kind of like a superpower. There's one way I saw it put by this person where basically, if you have ADHD, you have more of a like a hunter's type of brain, right? Where you you're finding that shortcut. Like you don't want to sit on like you don't want to sit on the farm all day and till the farm, right? You just want to go hunt for a couple hours, catch a wildebeest, and then just like go chill for the rest of the day. And I think
yeah.
that society is more like optimized for that sort of agrarian lifestyle of going to the same place, doing the same thing for 8 hours a day, and people with like these sort of like hunter brains or the hunter lifestyle who prefer to just go out there and eat what they kill type of thing. Like society is just not well equipped for people like us. So it's like, yeah, maybe that kid has ADHD, but maybe also like he doesn't need to be sitting in a chair for 8 hours. Like maybe just let the kid go outside and like hang out and like go play with bugs or something new. Like maybe he does have it, but maybe I think it's always looked at as people never look at maybe people see it the way it's like, oh, you have something wrong with you. Where it's like maybe you're the way you are is just fine, and maybe the environment around you has something wrong with it. And
Yeah.
if you just change the environment, it's that whole like, if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it's gonna think it's stupid, right? And so I think a lot of people who maybe aren't neurologically wired the same as everyone else, like maybe there's nothing wrong with that at all. They just need to find an arena in which like that's a strength for them instead of a negative.
I completely agree with everything you're saying. And I just want to set disclaimer just for anyone listening that I'm not sitting here diagnosing you with ADHD because I don't have the qualifications. But I am diagnosed with ADHD, so I can say that. And I guess I went to a psychiatrist because I was like, I'm just curious. I want to talk about this. But my psychiatrist told me he also has ADHD, and he was saying like evolutionarily, there's a reason we exist, which is like think of it as, there's a tribe and everyone is kind of following the path, following whatever's in front of them. Maybe you're picking the berries and someone else is like, I don't know, hunting or whatever the makeup is. And the person with the attention waning, and I think the term attention deficit disorder is a bad term to describe like the way our brains work. But the person who's not thinking the way everyone else is the one that's noticing, like, oh, there's a poisonous snake in the bushes, guys, get out, we're gonna die. Or like, oh, there was some sort of study showing like people with ADHD can like find more effective ways of picking berries because you're like looking at all the other bushes. So I think that the way it's been termed kind of looks at it as a disorder, but this comes into something that you actually write about in your book, which is systems and how the school system has been built, which is to create us into kind of following a system, not challenging the system. And those of us with kind of more divergent ways of thinking struggle with that. And that's not because there's something wrong with us, that's because the system is just not built for people with our brains. But something you highlight, and I hope I got this right, but in your book, you highlight that it used to be more beneficial follow the system. In fact, I actually wrote a quote down somewhere. Let me just find it. Yeah, anyway, I'm not sure how I'll find it, but it used to be more beneficial to follow the system and kind of like go by the rules. So that's when you kind of might enter that traditional structure of being in corporate or something, but it's not always the case anymore. And I don't know if you feel this, but I sometimes feel like because the general workplace is so unstable, like people have to pivot careers every like 2 years. The idea of staying in one role, like sitting at your office for 40 years, is not very common anymore. It's like increasingly rare. I find that having the adaptability and generally just not like that sort of entrepreneurial way of doing things, not settling, like always having new ideas and wanting to start new projects, can be more beneficial than kind of having a very straight and narrow way of approaching things and just following the rules. Whereas in the past, I think maybe it was more beneficial to be a more organized, rule following brain thinker. I don't know if that makes sense. Is that something that you would agree with? Is that what the point you were trying to make in your book?
Yeah, 100%. Where like, let's say a couple decades ago, you'd have like very high levels of job security. Where if you go like look at a traditional family structure, where it was like one like even when like women worked at home or whatever, like the whole thing was basically like, just from like a financial perspective. Like, you could be like one guy. You could work at a regular factory. You could support a wife and kids and have a car and all that. You can't live like that now. It's not it's not possible, right? So your incentives to go find like more leveraged styles of income makes more sense. And I feel like if you're reliant on if you're relying on a third party for your income, like it kind of lulls you to sleep, right? So there's this passage from this book, Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, and he's like, consider a turkey that gets fed every single day, right? With each increasing day, he has more confidence that he's going to continue to be well fed and survive. But then Thanksgiving comes, right? And then, all 364 days of security for the turkey were erased in one day, right? So if you look at it, if you are working at a job where you have built your entire lifestyle around the certainty of receiving that check, you're not that many checks away from your life completely falling apart, right? And we've seen that. We've seen that with recessions. We've seen that with COVID. Like we've seen that with all sorts of different things that have happened in the economy. Where if all of a sudden your job becomes null and void, like, and you have no backup skills, and you're just picking your berries, right? Where you're not looking around and saying, oh, like there might be a threat to my industry versus someone like me, like sure, like my income fluctuates a lot, but it's almost safer in that I'm constantly monitoring it and tinkering with it, right? So they even have like an analogy that street signs, sometimes places with more street signs can cause more accidents because people are like lulled into a false sense of security and they're not paying as much attention. Where if you see people like in these other countries like India, or they're like on the Autobahn and stuff, like it seems chaotic, but since people are actually more paying attention and maneuvering around, like it's actually can be like counterintuitively safer. So I think that's like a good parallel for what it's like to have your own leverage sources of income, or just even hedging a little bit. So it's not necessarily that you have to be an entrepreneur, but it could be like, hey, maybe you have a 9 to 5 job, but maybe you have the side hustle thing, like you freelance on the side and you're making a couple hundred extra a month, and you got some investments and stuff like that. And you see a lot of people now where they're like, most people, like a lot of people have like a little thing now, like they're doing some freelancing, or they got another job, or they're doing DoorDash, or they're trading crypto. Like I think everyone's kind of realizing that you can't just like sit and chill in your one little job and just expect that it's just going to be there permanently, especially with the way even industries and stuff are changing so fast now.
I love that you highlight this idea of the false sense of security, and I've very much kind of had my eyes opened since leaving South Africa, moving to the Middle East. Many people in my network are from Sudan. My partner is Sudanese, and like I don't know if anyone knows about what's happening in Sudan right now, but you can't live in Sudan. Like there's pretty much no country there. There's no economy. And so coming from a space like that, I think it's opened my eyes a lot to just how unstable systems are, banks, like countries, economies. And it seems really like nihilistic to plan for the worst. But I think that diversifying in the way we kind of approach things, the places where we can live, the where we keep our money, where we're working, it's not really gonna backfire. It just, I don't know, like things are less stable than we know. And I think living through eras of war can show that. But something I want to talk to you about in your book, you talk about like taking accountability for our lives, and you kind of highlight, I think you had a chapter called Nobody is Coming to Save You. And I love the sort of concept of this because I think that you touch on topics that is often missing in a lot of self-help books that I've read, which is this idea that circumstances can be different. Some people, I think a lot of self-help books will tell you, get rid of your limiting mindsets and put the things in action. And you highlight the fact that, like, for a single working mom, it's harder than it is for someone who is like upper middle class and has money. And so you had some of your own circumstances. You speak about your mother's background, like coming from generally kind of difficult background, poverty, I think, in the US, your dad being from Nigeria, but that you reached this point where you realized you couldn't be a victim to circumstances, you being a Black American, having, I think you'd been incarcerated, so you had like a criminal record at the time, is that right? And this topic is fascinating to me, this idea of like not being a victim, because I totally get it and I totally support this notion, because like we have to take control of things to change things. But it interests me when circumstances become extenuating. So, like I just touched on just now, like my partner and many of my friends being from Sudan, and I'm always blown away by how much like everyone I know from Sudan does not have a victim mentality, and I think that that's what keeps things moving. That's what like how they're alive and functioning and supporting lots of people. But yeah, I'm just curious, kind of like what it means to be resourceful even when you don't have resources, because I know that this is a topic you touch in your book, and I just think it's generally an under-discussed thing, and I'd love to hear, yeah, straight from you what it means.
Yeah, I think it just all comes down to the question is like, what are you gonna do about it? Like when so like let's say someone comes up to me and they're like, "Hey, Io, I'm a single mom. I'm diabetic, left-footed, lesbian, discriminated against." I'm like, okay, but like that's your life. That's what your situation is. So you could either wait for society to rise all the boats to the tides, whatever that saying is, or like you can get on with your life and like figure out what you can do, right? So here's what I would say. I would say that on the one hand, I'll grant you like there are tons of factors outside of your control that affect how your life is, 100%. But I think people should ask themselves: have you, on a personal level, exhausted every single potential resource that you could in order to fix your situation? And if the answer is no, you have to look in the mirror and figure that out. So like a lot of people are like, oh, this, and this, I don't have time, I don't have this, and this. So like, okay, do you watch TV? Oh, well, yeah, I watch a couple hours of TV. Oh, are you on TikTok? Oh, maybe I do that. Oh, do you go out and hang out with your friends sometimes? Blah, blah, blah. And the point of me saying that all that stuff isn't to scold anyone and being like, you shouldn't watch TV or you shouldn't do this. But what I am saying is you have to understand the consequences and trade-offs of your decisions. So, like, let's paint an imaginary world where you didn't watch TV, you didn't watch Netflix, you didn't go out, and you sat down and went and watched free YouTube videos on how to make money and studied copywriting and sales and marketing every spare minute or hour of your day and reached out to get clients every single spare minute of your day, your financial situation might change. But you're just not doing that. And no one's saying that it's fair of you or unfair of you. Because, like, to be honest, in a lot of situations, based on whatever your immutable characteristics, you might have to work twice as hard as someone else to get the same result. You might
Yeah.
get discriminated against. But if that's the route to get it, like that's the route to do it. And like I think for me, like concepts of fairness, I think that they're noble, like in the long term. Like that we should have movements, and we have had movements related to fairness and equity that have helped people out. But I just don't know if you, on a personal level, have time to wait for all that stuff to get sorted out. Because maybe by the time where there's this perfect equilibrium where someone in your position has the perfect opportunity, you might be old or dead. Like so, it's your life. You got to get on with it, like what you have going on right now, and in
Yeah.
in the internet too. I think the internet is so powerful, where you can learn how to do almost anything for free. You can learn how to do it for relatively cheap. As you ascend up, like you can have people work closely with you and mentor you and do different things. And there's so many opportunities. And again, not saying that everyone has to be an entrepreneur, but it's like figure out like the best possible lane based on your characteristics, right? So even something as simple as I saw this video from Alex Hermosi, and it was like how to triple your income. It was like if you're working some low wage job right now, you could go study to be a phlebotomist and you could get a job starting at $25 an hour, $30 an hour. All you have to do is like study and take this one test. It's like something that you could go do. You don't have to be working at the $8 an hour job, $10 an hour job if you want to. You can go get that thing and triple your income right now, but you're not going to do it. Those
A
type of
lobotomist?
no, not a lobotomist, a,
Sorry.
a phlebotomist, right? So it's like you like draw like learn how to draw people's blood or something like that, right?
Okay, that makes more sense.
Go get a little. You can go get a little certification, like, or even if you hate your job, go get a better job. Like, no one's telling you that you have to be like. I think what a lot of people, and again, what I also say to people when it comes to their decisions, like, let's take like someone has a situation where like some people reach out to me and they're like, well, it's easier for some people to say like they don't have kids. I was like, with all due respect, like nobody put a gun to your head and told you to have children. Like you chose to have children, right? And so even with stuff like that, it's like everything that goes on in your life is have it's part circumstance, part personal, part choices and decision making. And I think that choices and decision making gets underrated quite a bit in
Yeah.
society. And I think that you have a lot more choice of what you can do than you might think, even if and if we're talking about America, like I think another reason why it's been very difficult for me to feel sorry for myself or ever feel disadvantaged is because like I have my dad's Nigerian. My mom grew my mom grew up very poor. And you know what her grand like my grandfather, her dad told her, we don't have no money. We don't have any money. Here's a library card. Go read every book in there. Get a scholarship. And that's what she did. She got all the school paid for. She went to the library, read free books, got real smart, got scholarships, graduated high school early, got master's degrees, all that stuff. She grew up poor, but education, even is down to level, you can go to the library and read books for free. They're free.
Yeah.
You don't need any
Yeah.
money. You could be dead broke and go to the library and learn something that'll help you out. So like, if you boil it down like that, like, there's always a path to figuring it out, especially if you're in America compared to other places. Like my dad's side of the family, they always tell me they're like you don't know how good you have it growing up here versus like where we had to grow up. Like it's total cakewalk compared to what they're going through. So lots of different thoughts on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this, and I think that it's always such a hard it's a hard thing to talk about. At least for me, I struggle to talk about it because often you see people talk about kind of being stuck for whatever reasons as children, there's financial restrictions or whatever. And I always like I'm reluctant to say like, you can fix things or there are things that you can control because obviously I can't speak to those circumstances. And the thing is like circumstances are real. Like as you said, you might have to work 2 times harder than someone else to do the thing you want to do, or even 10 times harder if you are like in a disadvantaged country or you don't have access to internet or something. But having this idea that things need to be fair before you can take action is extremely dangerous. And I think if you're in a position to focus on changing the systems and that's a choice you make, that's okay. And like that's admirable and that's great. But I think it's also okay to choose to focus on up-leveling yourself. And in the process, you probably will up-level other people. Because I think, like, at least in my experience, when someone has sort of broken past being in a disadvantaged space, they've generally brought up many, many people along with them. And in your book, you write, taking responsibility for yourself is painful when you have no scapegoat because you feel the weight of your own inaction. And I think that's kind of the heart of it, right? Is that for many people, really taking stock of what they can do and not externalizing it and blaming the external forces, which can be at play, very much can be, is scary because you also now have to look at the things that you could have been doing and perhaps you haven't been doing. There is that kind of place of, I need to take action. And it's reaching that point of self-awareness that I think is hardest for many people. So my second to last question for you is, do you have any advice on how people can reach that point of self-awareness?
Yeah, I think in order to reach that point of self awareness, you just have to you have to have some sort of brutally honest assessment of your situation, where it's almost like turn off the daydreaming for a little bit and like assess. So I think one thing that happens to a lot of people is they get wrapped up in this idea of their potential, where like they kind of imagine themselves like what they would be like if they turned on if they turned it on and like did everything they were supposed to be doing, and then you can kind of cling to that idea that like I could be that person, but I just haven't done it yet, right? And what you're really afraid of is actually putting all your effort into it and finding out that maybe you aren't cut out like for what you thought you were. Maybe you aren't who you think you are. And I think it's better sometimes to take a step back. Like I'm all for visualizing the future, we have to look at the reality of your situation and assess it, and like kind of take the attitude that, at least for right now, like your behavior and your outcomes, that's who you really like. That's who you really are. Like a lot of like the way your outcomes, like that's an internal reflection of the way you really see yourself. And you also have to understand that part of it, like on some level, as strange as it might sound, you want to be you want to be in the position that where you're at right now. And the reason why is because one of the things you get addicted to most is familiarity. Like you're just addicted to like that level of life that you're accustomed to, even if you don't like it. The alternative of like facing the uncertainty might be worse. And I think all of us have those, like all of us has that whisper in our head of like, we all know what to do. We know what we're supposed to be doing. We know if we don't like that job. We know if we're settling for that partner. We know if we want to be making more money. We know what career we would be doing if we knew it would work. We know where we're selling ourselves short. We know what part is circumstances and what part's on us. Like deep down, we all know. And I think it's sitting down and having that conversation. Like, I mean, sometimes literally, like, if you got to talk to yourself in the mirror about like whatever you got to do, just brutally honest self-assessment and kind of get out of that la la land where you're either picturing a potential future that you're not doing anything towards, or if like you're putting a lot of your energy. And I see this happen a lot lately with like social stuff or politics or things like that, where I think a lot of people are putting so much energy into it as a way to like almost drown out that voice of like, well, it's really like there's really things that you could be doing. It's like, yes, the laws affect you. Yes, politics is important. Yes, all that stuff. But like you individually, like you're not gonna overthrow some corrupt political system like by yourself. And I think putting your energy into that is it's not number one. I don't think it's very healthy for you mentally. And number two, I think you can have like like a greater ripple effect on your own. Where like if you look at like I guess even look at my story, like I've written books, passed on knowledge. I've had people who've read my books go on to start their own businesses, put money in their own pockets, do things that they didn't see previously. I've gone and given speeches for high schools and youth groups and students, and so like I'm not changing the world maybe, but like there's a little ripple effect around what I've been able to do. And like then if those people, they have a little ripple effect, like so like I feel like if everyone kind of minded their own thing and like put their stuff out there, then like that collective like sort of ripple effect would be a lot stronger than this sort of like end around collectivist like methodology that I think a lot of people are into.
Yeah, yeah. And I agree with a lot of what you're saying. And I can't speak to people who are actively involved in like social advocacy because I'm not in that space and don't know what it means to be. I mean, I don't know the intricacies of working in that space, but I had like, I think one of my core values is social justice. So making the decision to be an entrepreneur in the beginning felt like kind of morally corrupt, like I'm choosing myself. And I've found that, like, for myself, it's meant that I can really hold a lot of agency over helping things that I care about. I have a lot of room. Having money helps. You can put your money where you care, like in causes you care about, but you can also help uplevel other people, mentor people. You know, there's a lot of agency, and I'm working with entrepreneurs on sort of socially driven projects, and I've spoken to people who worked for sort of NGOs and gone, I guess, the more noble route and many of them have told me that they feel really frustrated and like there's no room to change things because they're sort of boxed into a system that they're not controlling. And I'm not going to sit here and say like what routes people should take, but opting for the route that gives you the most control and agency is often, you can have that, as you said, that ripple effect in the way that you impact people. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to add anything, but otherwise I'll
I
ask
think
that specific
I think
question.
the only distinction I was trying to make was like it was less so talking about people who were like actively involved in those organizations. I meant more people who were like almost like kind of like armchair activists who like they sit on Facebook all day and pour their energy into that, and they think they're doing something. Where I would tend to disagree. Where I think where people get overly invested in sort of like sharing the stuff on social media and arguing with people, and like they're always up to date on what's going on online and stuff like that. Now, this kind of yapping. Well, like if you work for an actual organization devoted to something, or like if you're an actual activist, like yeah, that's your mission, that's your calling. But I think a lot of people are using it as sort of armchair activism as kind of like a shadow calling to
Yeah.
from their real one.
And it's really bad, as you pointed out. I think for one's mental health, and like there's research on this because we are when you are an armchair activist, you really can't do much to change things, and so it's frustrating. It's frustrating spending time looking at stuff, and like I used to do a lot of that when I was in university, and I was like, I realized that this is not bringing any good to the world. It's just making my mental health suffer. So yeah, thank you so much, Ayodeji, for your time today. My final question. So in your TED talk, you said a line that really stuck with me, which is, "Sure, you might feel like a fraud the entire time, but deep down, you understand that you're living your truth." And this is something that struck me because I feel like a fraud hosting this podcast. Like I feel like a fraud every time I'm interviewing someone who is extremely successful like you and has, done all these things. And, I felt like a huge fraud when I had a call with you previously asking for your endorsement in the podcast. But I'm doing it anyway. I like have this belief that like the confidence will be a byproduct of the action. And this has always driven me. And I care about the mission more than I care about my feelings. So my final question for you is, do you have this maybe also a little bit off the bat? Do you have any advice for me on how to grow this show? I have a big mission. I don't want it to be a niche show, and I feel like you have a lot of smart branding and sort of partnerships expertise. So I'm curious what your advice would be.
Yeah, I keep doing what you're doing and being like the one thing that made me respond to you is that I usually get cold pitched a lot of times, and like they're usually just so terrible. And like I could tell that you have some sort of knowledge in that area because you offered some sort of like reciprocation sort of energy. Everything was very succinct. Like it made it a pretty easy yes. And I think for people like especially when you're trying to pitch yourself, like people want to say yes to you, but you have to it's almost like they can sense like the level of seriousness that you have. And I think it just like continue doubling down. Right. I think the main thing that happens when you're trying to grow a business or an audience is like if you get one thing to work, like so right now you have this pitching thing that works, right? We have this weird tendency where we want to start fumbling around with too many different things. Where it's like if you get one thing that's working really well, like you want to hammer that home until it stops working, right? So in your case, like take the names of previous guests, continue leveraging them. It'll help you keep getting better and better ones. And then through people sharing it and stuff like that, it'll create that compounding. So like honestly, having like taken your original plan and just continuing to stick to it for a long enough period of time until it works, and then you'll just continually get better, right? Your podcast, your podcast production will get better, your speaking will get better, all that stuff will get better. So like I remember even like I gotta think of the time for the first time I did like a YouTube video, like my cadence, my delivery, my tone versus the way that it is now, like, it just gets much better, and you just continue to grow and grow and grow. And I also think that, especially when it comes to business models, I just like I'm more of a fan of just copying what works, right? So I'm not extremely familiar with what the podcast industry does, but like whoever the people who are growing the fastest in podcasts with the methods that they're using, like you can largely just copy them and like add your own little twist to them. But I think you're on a good track. So just do take whatever you're doing and do more of it, maybe more often, more frequently, and then as you continue delivering new episodes and stuff like that, it'll just continue compounding.
Thank you. That's really good advice. And I've like given this advice in other contexts where it's like, if you're building a business, choose social media platform you like, stop trying to be on every platform. But I never really thought of it in this context because I do have this like sense of like I should be everywhere. Like there are so many strategies that you can implement to scale a podcast. And like now that you've framed it that way, I'm like, that totally makes sense. So, you have something that works, double down on that thing that works. And only when it's not working or when you have a lot more capacity, start expanding. So thank you. And thank you for being such a great guest. I really enjoyed today's conversation. I learned a lot. I'm sure the listeners learned a lot. So yeah, I know you're a writing coach. Anyone listening who's looking for support, where can they find you, and what kind of support can they get from you?
Yeah, I think the best place to find me would be on social media, on Twitter, LinkedIn. So like my handle is Ayo the author, so AYO the author. I do have a newsletter if you want to put that in the show notes or something, where I use a lot of my strategies about writing, making money online, landing clients. Those can be found in my newsletter. Or they just yeah, basically those.
That's fantastic. Yeah, the link will be in the show notes for everything, social media, newsletter, and of course the books. So I'm giving away a copy of Real Help, an honest guide to self-improvement to a listener who subscribes, but also order yourself a copy on Amazon. And you can also get a copy of some of his other books and see if the writing really has improved, over time, or if it's just your hypercritical mind. Thanks so much for your time, Ayodeji. This was a really great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Did you know that my company, Hustling Writers, books entrepreneurs, and authors on podcasts? We've been doing this for the last 5 years, and we've booked our clients on hundreds of top 1% and top 0.5% podcasts, which has, as a result, led to their books being instant bestsellers and even selling out on Amazon on the day of release. If this is of interest to you and the idea of being interviewed by a name like Adam Grant or Mariana Hewitt sounds really exciting, let me know. Email media@hustlingwriters.com and I'll be in touch to book a discovery call.